Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the October edition of Power Hour. My name is Jamie Larson. I'll be your host today, along with G. Carnegie, our Director of Customer Solutions Engineering. Appreciate your time. We had something like 200 and some registrants today, so it's great to see. We hope you're finding these useful. Today's topic will be Troubleshooting 101. The inspiration for this Power Hour came from conversations we had with our technical support team, asking them what are the most common troubleshooting questions that you get, where are people getting stuck, how can we make a resource for our customers where they can go and fix all of the most common issues that they're running into. So this is a version of the list that we got from our tech support team, along with some ideas from our sales engineers. So I'm going to start with some of the basics, and I mentioned 200 some registrants. I think it's fair to assume that that means we've got some new Orion users, which is great. So we'll start with some of the basic things like creating a system backup, doing a factory reset of an Orion, how to do firmware upgrades, which may sound scary, but it's actually a really easy process. We'll get into communications troubleshooting. I've got a demo file created so that we can show kind of our flow chart of how we approach communications troubleshootings, the tools we have built into Web UI that you can use for that, and just our overall approach to troubleshooting communications. And then lastly, for me, I'm going to do IRIG Setup. Time setup is a very common question that our tech support team receives. So we'll go over those settings in the Web UI. And I'll hand it over to Chi, and she'll show Firefox settings, how to fix a common SSL error. She's got a demo with her LXM for high memory usage, as well as what to do when you've got a locked out user, and a review of setting up cascading. So again, these are all from you guys, from our customers, based on our tech support's input. That being said, let's get to...
As Jamie's setting up, if anyone have any additional things that they ran into, feel free to ask them on our question pane. And if we have time at the end, we can go through it if it's easy to show, or we will reach out to you directly, or maybe we'll add it to our future Power Hour.
Exactly.
So feel free to ask away.
We encourage questions. So you should be seeing two side-by-side screens. One is an MMI connection through NCD to my Orion SX, and the other one is the home screen of my Orion SX. So before we get into doing factory wipes and firmware upgrades, especially with firmware upgrades, we always suggest that you create a system backup file. Very rarely does anything go wrong, but I think you'll feel much better about the process knowing that you have that. So from the home page, under the Diagnostics tab, which we'll spend a bit of time in, come down to the System menu. If you scroll down, you'll see this user configuration tile. And if you simply click back up, you'll be presented with three options. So system files is always defaulted to check. That's how your web UI is set up, your banners and your links on your home page. User files are your actual NCD files, SVGs, AAR, Lua code, all that. And then your database. This is the database built into the Orion if you're using AAR. For the sake of time, I'm not going to select my database. Just keep in mind that if you do have AAR set up and you do want to download a backup of your database, it may just take a little bit more time, but make sure that option is checked. So I'll hit a backup. You can see the download happening up here, download in progress. And you'll see this sysfiles.zip. So now that we've got a backup stored for this Orion, we're going to talk about a factory wipe. So the process is, it's a little hidden, and I'll show you the whole thing, but sometimes when a factory wipe might be necessary is, if you're looking to repurpose an Orion to a different location or substation, and you want to just start fresh, you can perform a factory wipe. maybe troubleshooting with our tech support team hasn't, fixed any issues. Sometimes a factory wipe can kind of wipe out any secret bugs that are living in the Orion. And thirdly, if you ever downgrade your firmware, you'll downgrade and you'll try and log in, and you may notice that the Orion's not letting you log in. It's not recognizing your username and password. That's because when doing a firmware downgrade, you have to also do a factory wipe after the downgrade. So a couple instances where a factory wipe might be necessary. In order to do that, you're going to come to your MMI, and this is a serial connection, not SSH. So I will log in using NovaTech. So now that I'm in here, I can come to my web UI page, and I'm going to do a full restart. So the process takes maybe 2 or 3 minutes, but and this is the key thing here, you really have to watch the boot sequence on your MMI. Near the end, it'll present you with an option, and it'll ask you, do you want to wipe your user data? And you have to type in yes and hit enter, and it'll ask you to confirm that decision, and you'll have to type in yes a second time and hit enter. So we'll watch this whole boot sequence, and in the interest of time, I'm not going to actually do the factory wipe. Same thing with the firmware upgrades. I'll show you the whole process up until the very last minute, but to keep the power hour within the hour, we're not going to actually do those things. So keeping an eye on the boot sequence, we'll pause a couple times, then keep going.
A question did come up, and I guess we don't really mention it, or we forget to mention it in other power hours too. But just for anyone who requires, professional development engineering hours, power hours do account for those. So feel free to reach out to us after the webinar, and we can print you out with your certificate and everything. So I guess we've never really mentioned it in other previous power hours, but it does account for your development hours. Oh, there you go, Jamie.
Here it is, wipe user data. This is where you type in yes the first time, and you would hit enter, and it would ask you to confirm that decision, type yes again, and hit enter. And the rest of the boot sequence would look very similar. So we'll let this restart, and I'll just say now, so if I were to actually wipe the Orion, that also means that my basic network settings is also getting wiped. So, my Orion will restart because we didn't do it, but if I did, I would not be able to reach my Orion on the web UI. And the way you fix that is in the MMI, you would have to go back and reset your basic network configuration, which is option number 8. And we've covered that in plenty of power hours. So that would be the first step after a wipe to regain access to your web UI. So that is the process of performing a factory wipe. Next on the list, we're going to perform a firmware upgrade. So on our Orion support site is where you can find all of our firmware upgrades, as well as maintenance releases. So I have a copy of version 10.4 in my downloads. So as you can see, I'm currently running 10.4. I'm fully upgraded. Process will look the same, so I'll step you through that. And as of version 10.0, we now have 2 options for performing firmware upgrades. The older and more common one is this executable, which is the file downloaded from the Orion support site. So screen probably went blank there. I'm just going to enter my admin credentials for my laptop. So it'll ask me, do I want to run the Orion updater? I'll click yes. It'll extract the files. And again, I haven't done anything with my Orion web UI yet. This is all just a download from our support site. So it'll give me some T's and C's that I always read all of this and faithfully click accept. And the second window pops up. So this bottom line here, you can see the Orion update server is running on port 8000. So this updater runs in the background. You may or may not have to adjust your firewall settings to open up port 8000. And we've got a little note on there. So if you're having issues, that's probably the first thing I would check. So with this executable running in the background, come back to my web UI, to my systems tab again. I will unlock my Orion. And here, image update. So when I click it, the only thing you have to confirm is the IP address of your laptop that's running that executable and make sure that it's on port 8000. And then you click download update. So this is where I'm going to stop in the interest of time. It'll ask you after this screen to confirm that you want to upgrade your firmware, and then it takes generally around 5 to 6 minutes to perform a full firmware upgrade. So that's the first process using the executable file. As of version 10.0, we now have the ability to, if I come to this Orion updater file that I have, if I go to show more options, under my 7-zip, I can extract these files. I'll click OK. So now I have this Orion update folder here, and you'll see these first 4 .swu file extensions. SWU stands for software upgrade. So if I were to come here in my Orion to my files tab, same as I drag and drop NCD files, this LX Plus, this is the firmware upgrade file for SX, LX Plus, and MX. So I could simply drag and drop this over into my files, send it, and it'll go into that same firmware upgrade process that I just showed you. IOs have their own, and then the LXM actually have 2 files that you need to drag and drop over here. So nice new feature, 2 different ways to perform firmware upgrades. Okay, so now let's move into troubleshooting. I'm going to close this out. So I've got a file running here in my Orion SX, and I want to look at some data values for this DNP client. This is a meter that I have running on my desk. It's a Bitronix M660. So let's go read some value. That's not good. Red is never a good color. You can see under the status that all of these individual points are marked offline. So clearly I'm having some sort of issue with this device. So under diagnostics, not only can I look at individual data values, I can also look at the entire device. So my DNP client port, it's marked offline. I can see 116 polls sent and no responses, 0% successful. So clearly we're having some sort of communication issue with this meter. As of version 10.4, you'll see this new ping button. Very neat feature. So the first thing I'm going to check is network connectivity. So if I ping this device, okay, 10 packets sent, 10 packets received, 100% successful. So clearly it's not an IP address or networking issue, which would lead me to believe that maybe this is something more on the DNP protocol side of things. So what I can do is come down to my View Comms tab. If I look at my DNP client, we can actually view the communications on that port. So I'm going to let a number of these attempts go through, and then I'm going to hit pause. So we've got this log here. Under this gear tab, you can, 1, clear the display, and 2, download the log. So if you wanted to download a log and send it to our technical support team, we've got some guys that are really good at interpreting these, Modbus and DNP transmit receive messages. So you can download a log, attach to an email, and send it. If you have multiple ports, this log will keep running. So that's why the clear display is listed in here, so that you can kind of start from scratch and then record a log of just the communications you're looking for. So I'll hit pause here, back to troubleshooting. Let's see, so I've got connection established to host 192.168.1.171. So that is the IP address of my meter. I know that it's not a networking issue, so working our way down, you can see the transmit that was sent, and then we get a response timeout for device 1. It waited 1,000 milliseconds or 1 second. It's recording consecutive failures, and it turns that device offline. So here I see reset remote link device 1 address 2. So that kind of tips me off or reminds me of the addressing, which is, besides networking, I would say probably the most common communication parameter that causes an error is the destination and source address. So if I pull up my Bytronics meter under my settings and protocol, let's just double check the addresses here. So my IED source 1 and my master destination is 100. Okay, well, communications channel was telling me that it's set for 2. So I'll come back to my configuration and I will just double check the addressing for this port. Okay, client address is 100, that's good. Host IP server address, that's correct. And for this specific device, there it is. I put in a wrong device address for this Bytronics meter. So I'll change that to 1, update this device. I already have a second version of this config file where the addressing was corrected, so I'll just switch that over. Give it a second to reboot the config file. And now when I come back to my data values, give it a second to, there it goes. Now we're back online. So 2 most common issues in comms is networking and the protocol options as far as the addressing. So something to keep in mind. I did actually create another configuration file that set an alarm off in the Orion. Sometimes you'll see an alarm banner here on the home page, and you can go and check your system logs to get more information. But the file I created was too good, as in it was causing some errors and I had to reboot my Orion. But what was causing the problems is I created a config file with AAR, and I didn't map any points into the configuration. So that'll give you an alarm banner. The other most common one you'll find in the logs is protocols that you aren't keyed for. Let's see if we can go to, where's my logs? Protocols that you aren't keyed for. If you've got something set up in a configuration file and you haven't actually been keyed for using that protocol, it will throw an alarm, and you can sort through the logs and it'll tell you exactly which port that error is occurring on. So that's a quick demonstration on troubleshooting communications. So in this instance, it was a DNP addressing issue. In the case where it is a networking issue, and say you ping that device from the devices tab and you don't get a response, the first places I would check would be first under networking. Make sure your interfaces are enabled, make sure all of your IP addresses are assigned as they should be. Make sure that you're not bridged or bonded. We've done power hours on that previously that we can share if anybody's interested. And lastly, the firewall tab here. If you're having network issues, make sure that your rules are configured correctly so that you're not dropping incoming or outgoing packets. The last topic I'd like to touch on is going to be time. We get a lot of questions on how to set time up in the Orion. So under the, I'll do that again, under settings, under time, it'll bring you here. First option is set up time zone, which does require a full restart for it to set in. So we've got all the different time zones listed. I'm here in Denver, set to US Mountain. You can manually set your time here. And then for IRIG and NTP, there's only two settings for IRIG. You choose unmodulated or modulated signal, and then you select your time zone. For network time protocol, I think this is where most of the questions come from. In the first tab up here, you can enter IP addresses of, say, a satellite clock, and you can see 192.168.1.206. That's the IP address of my Kronos I have here at home. You can add multiple time sources in here, and the Orion, it doesn't have a preference or an order for which it takes the time signal. It simply uses the best time available. This ntp.pool.org, this is a public time NTP server. You can see all these other ones that I've had in here at one point or another. So really, if you've got a satellite clock, you're just entering an IP address, and you can enter multiple time sources in here as well. If you're still having issues with it, the other place you can troubleshoot is back here under data values. In this NTP kernel, if I click on inputs, we've got three kind of time quality markers. So this Orion time quality, it's a scaled value from 0 to 32, 32 being the best time signal. It's, if you're at 32, you're within plus or minus, I forget exactly how many microseconds, but gradually as you get farther and farther away from peak accuracy, that number will slowly drop down. Time quality is a 0 or a 1. If it's at 1, that means that your accuracy is plus or minus, I think, 500 microseconds. And the time reachability is an 8-bit. Basically, it's how many times of the last 8 polls did you receive a good time response. So if you're showing 255, then you're getting good time response on all 8 of those polls. So just one more feature to help you troubleshoot setting time in the Orion, somewhere you can check to see if it's working as you'd expect. I believe that covers it for me. I will switch over to Chi.
Thanks, Jamie. All right, so one of the first things I'm going to show is, and we do get this question a fair bit, around March 2020, a lot of the browsers have pretty much increased their TLS certificate, SSL TLS certificate, to be 1.2 or higher. And so what that means is that for any devices that supports TLS 1.0, 1.1, that browser can't view it anymore. So what it forced us to do is that we had to create a firmware upgrade on all our Orions to support TLS 1.2 and higher. But in the event that you have an Orion that is earlier than distro version 9.44, it will have TLS 1.0 and 1.1. If you try to view it with a browser that is new, and most of the time your IT or your laptop upgrades automatically, you won't be able to access that old Orion. And so we do have a method to access the Orion, and then we recommend once you access Orion, upgrade it to later than 9.44. So right now, so this is my MX. It is in a later version, so you can obviously you can view it using Chrome. I do have a an Orion LXM that's on version distro 9.2, and if I try to access it with Chrome, I believe you'll get an error like this. It says version mismatch, you can't access it. And so the only method that we found that works is, unfortunately, if you don't have Firefox on your laptop, you will have to install Firefox. Firefox is the only browser that we know that you can go back to supporting TLS 1.0 and 1.1. Chrome and Edge pretty much locked it down. You can't go back. And so where you would go to do that on your Firefox, so this, I already have it configured, so I just want to show you. If you type in about:config, it'll take you to the Firefox setting, and you just type in TLS to search for it. And so there's actually two locations. You can do one or the other. I tested both and they work. So if you go down to we look for deprecated. So one option is to click on this to make it true. So that's option number one. So it pretty much deprecates the TLS version back to 1.0, 1.1. Or you can leave it as false. And what you can do is what we have here is TLS version minimum. So I think by default right now, if you go into Firefox, it is actually at 3. If you click on that arrow, that's the default arrow. And so if I have it at 3, and let me go and try accessing my Orion LXM, it won't work, right? So if I go and now change it to 1, which is the minimum, which is TLS 1.1, let me close the browser to refresh it. And let me try accessing my Orion LXM again. And now it works. So, so once you do get access to your Orion LX using Firefox, we always recommend, now that you have the web user interface, go ahead and upgrade that firmware to later than 9.44. That way, the Orion now has TLS 1.2, and you can use your Chrome, your Edge, whatever browser you want, and you're not just limited to Firefox. So that's a very common question. Feel free to reach out if you run into any issues with this, but this is usually our go-to procedure for the mismatch of TLS certificate. All right, so the next topic I'll cover is, I wouldn't say it's pretty common, and it might be a little bit more advanced, but because there's Linux commands required, but we will go through it. So we do run into this problem a decent amount, because so sometimes, depending on your application, what you're using the Orion for, you might see if the your web UI is sluggish, it's kind of acting weird. One of the first things we recommend checking is the system. If you go to System tab, and if you view the overlay, so I faked this so that I can demo this today. So right now the overlay, if you see the usage of it, is using all of my memory and it's at 100%. So if your web UI is showing sluggish, that's probably the reason. Most likely the reason. You'll see other weird things too. For example, my config has alarm, archive, and retentive configured. And if I go and view my archive, you'll see an error on the page. So these are one of the side effects of high memory usage on the Orion. So it won't corrupt the Orion completely when you use up all its memory, but it will stop certain certain critical features of the Orion. So archiving is not high, I guess, priority feature versus, let's say, your SCADA polling and so on. So that would probably be the first to go. But obviously, we want your Orion to function 100% completely. So the thing is, you need to make sure you clean out your Orion so that this is not at 100%. So to do that, we do have some Linux commands that we can run to say, hey, what is taking up all the space? So if you go and connect to your Orion, let's connect to my MX here. And let's log in. Oop. So as I mentioned, this will require you running Linux command. So I would recommend, well, not recommend, but root user has the command line access to the Orion. So I would have to log into root. Obviously, this is all user permission, so you can configure other users to have command line access. That's configured on the user's settings of the Orion. So right now, what I want to do is I want to run a command that shows what folder is taking up all the space, pretty much. So bear with me if you're not familiar with Linux command. I'm not familiar with Linux commands either. I just learned this, but it is useful to know. And you can always either rewatch this webinar to get the command, or to write it down, or reach out to me and we can help you out. So this root command will show you the directory. It will sort the directory in your Orion, and it shows you what folder is taking up a lot of space. So it sorts it, and it shows that, hey, your variable, your var folder is taking up 709 meg. So it will sort it from lowest to highest. All right, so that is the folder that is taking up a lot of space. You can actually go dig deeper and do cd var. And now you can run the same command, but without the slash. And it will, again, will sort it out for you. And it says, hey, in your var folder, there's another folder called cache, and it's taking up a lot of room as well. So I can kind of keep running this command. So again, if anyone's not familiar with command line interface, if you press the up button, arrow button, it will repeat the same command for you, and it will keep sorting that out. So, so I need to go into CD cache now, run the same command, and now here's my culprit, is my CSV file generator. So if people aren't familiar with this, we do have ability in the Orion. If you are using the archiving capability, there's a tool called CSV file generator that captures those archive data and create CSV file, and it stores it on your Orion. Now, if you have it, and it can be scheduled. And so what I've done is I've created a schedule to create these CSV files once a day or every few days, and it overloaded my Orion. So if I open up my FileZilla, which I use, so to access the Orion folder directory, you would have to use an FTP tool or SFTP tool. So type in my Orion IP address. We are going to do root. And 22 is the SFTP, so the secure function of FTP. So what we're going to do, if you remember, we found that it was the folder var, then cache, and then that CSV file generator. And if you dig deeper, you'll see that I typed in the wrong Orion. Hold on. it is my 208, not 202. So let me change this, because that Orion doesn't have that much files in it. So let's switch. var cache CSV file generator. All right, so this is all the files. So this is what's taking up so much space. So each file are 15 meg, and if you have a lot, so that's what's bogging the Orion down. So you're more than welcome to go and download this to your laptop, have a copy of it, which I've done previously, as you can see over here. But you can go and delete it, and because I logged in as a root user, I have the ability to delete it. So we can delete it, yes. And now if I switch to my Orion view, let's refresh this, it's down to 37%. And if you think, so that's a reasonable percentage. You don't need to do any more cleaning, but you can go and run the same command and see what's taking a lot of space. And my guess would be is, if let's try again, we're going to try the archive tab, and I believe I need to reboot the Orion still, now that we cleaned it out. Well, it would require to do a full reboot. I don't want to, it takes a lot of time, so we're not going to do that, but the full reboot will start getting your database working again, your archive going, and so on. All right, so the next thing I want to show is, and we get this call a decent amount too, how do you unlock a user? So I'm hoping I don't need to do a reboot. So if you have a user, so I just created a view only user here. Right now it's normal. Let me double, so in settings, authentication rules, you have the ability, if someone logs in, log into the Orion and they put in the wrong password more than 3 times, they can be locked out by this amount of time. I don't know how much. That's our default. You can change that value to maybe 1 day, in seconds wise. You can actually have it locked out permanently, but regardless, that user is unlocked. So let me go and log out that user, or log out my user and log in as this view only. And I'm going to attempt to fail it 3 times. So I'm just going to type in bad password 3 times to log out that user. That's 2, and then that's 3, and then even if I try to type in the right password, it won't let me log in. So if someone gets locked out and they realize they type in the wrong password too many times, they will need to find someone that has access to that Orion and has a different login, and that person needs to have the permission to unlock people. So one option is I log into NovaTech. And if I go to users, oh, I need to log in again. If I view only, it'll show that that user is 3 failed login attempts, and I would have to unlock them by clicking on this. It also says how long they're going to be unlocked for. So if I want them to sweat out a little bit, I can let them wait 47 hours, but I can manually unlock them by clicking this. So that's option number 1. Switching back, if you're more of a MMI interface person, I can log in command line interface again, and I can run this command here, faillog. It's called fail log, and it shows you what users currently is locked out. So you can see here, obviously this interface is not as clear or obvious, but it says view only user ID is 1001, failed 3 times. This is the timestamp for it. So if I want to unlock that user, I can type in fail log and the user ID, which is 1001, and that should unlock them. So if I go and refresh the screen, they're no longer locked. So web UI is obviously the easiest way to do it, but in the event that you don't have the web UI, you can do the command line access. And I can go and try and log in as this view only user. Now I type in the right password. And obviously they don't have certain permissions, but they can view, they have view only access. So that is a way to unlock users. In the event that you're locked and and you don't know anyone else that has permissions on Orion, you may have to wait it out for whatever. I believe that default was 48 hours, which is 2 days. You might have to wait it out. If for some reason your system is set up to be permanently locked, oops, sorry, I need to log back in as a NovaTech person. If it's permanently locked and you don't know anyone else, then and if there's no other choice. This is the last resort, or you completely forgot your passwords and no one else can log in and reset your passwords and so on. You would have to do a wipe, unfortunately. And Jamie did a demo of a wipe earlier on to default factory reset, and you can use the default NovaTech login. But we always recommend have at least few users in the Orion know their passwords, so that if someone's locked out, you can go into as a different user and unlock them. All right. One next topic I want to cover is a recap of cascading. This comes up a lot. The reason being is cascading is our kind of proprietary protocol. And if any new Orion users on the call have never heard of this, then it's as a intro to that for everyone, and for anyone who is using it. Then this will be a recap for you. So what cascading is the ability to have, if you have more than one Orion, most common application is you have your head-in Orion LX class or MS or SX, and you're using our Orion IOs, and instead of having separate NCD files on each of these units, and let's say DNP server here, DNP server list here, and then you have to have a matching point list up at the top to pull it using DNP. That works. A lot of our customers use that. But to save time and producing a matching point list and so on, we do have a cascading protocol that pretty much allows you to configure multiple Orions in one NCD file. And when you push the NCD file, you push down to what we call a Cascade client. And that Cascade client will look at the NCD file and say, hey, this is a cascaded file. I need to push these Cascade servers files individually down to each of the Orion downstream. This only works on Ethernet communication, not serial communication. There's 3 different ways we've seen our customers use it. I kind of highlight it in these slides here. Most of the time, because it's Ethernet based, at your substation, you'll have an external switch. So just connect your, your Orions and Orion IOs, for example, here to that Ethernet switch. As long as they're on the same network, this works. For anyone who doesn't know, our Orion Alex Plus had NovaCard 2, I believe, has 12 Ethernet ports, which can act as a switch. So if you don't have an external switch and you want to use our NovaCard 2, then you can configure your Orion IOs to be connected to that NovaCard, and now you don't need an external switch. Again, it's all on the same network. And then the most interesting architecture we've seen is cascading IOs. But so if you order the Orion IO with, this will be an LX Plus, by the way, if we want to mimic the other architecture. I just forgot to swap it out. But yeah, so if you order the Orion IOs with the 4 Ethernet ports, these ports can act as a separate port and be different subnet, or you can bridge them together and act as a switch. And you can, quote unquote, daisy chain them like this because they are all on the same network using Ethernet cable. So you don't need, this is an event that you don't have an external switch or you don't need that NovaCard 2. I think this picture depicts an application where you have a lot of IOs, but you don't need to pull a lot of devices. So an IO, by the way, just a reminder to everyone, that can act as an RTU. You can enable master protocols on it using DNP or Modbus. The only limitation is we have a limit of 600 points on it because IO is not a true RTU. It can act as an RTU, but we just can't have a lot of points on it just because of its horsepower. So if you need more than 600 points, obviously get an LX Plus, MX, SX, so on. But if you have a lot of hardwire IO, one of those IO can be your quote unquote cascaded client. And it'll be the main one that you push the config down, and then it will know it's smart enough to push the corresponding config down to the other ones. As a reminder, I'll just go through how to configure Cascade really quickly. It's not crazy complicated. The one thing that people do forget, and I always have to remind them, and this is why I brought it up in today's topic, is that the main thing you need to do on the Cascade server side of things is to configure a web UI. A lot of people forget this. On the web UI, so let's just pretend my Orion is a Cascade server. So let me log back in. And if you go under settings, Cascaded, log back in. So this is for cascading servers. So this is pretty much configuring, hey, I'm going to be configured as a cascaded server, and so I'm going to be listening for my cascaded client device. So what we want to do is saying, hey, what TCP port you want to listen on, and then type in the device IP address that's acting as your cascaded client. Let's say my 202 is my client. If needed, you can have this connection here encrypted. When you deal with encryption, you can check off this SSL, but you do have to make sure you get your IT or your team to create self-signed certificates and upload it to the Orion, and then select those certificates here. So, so that's a whole new, that's a whole separate thing. I don't want to focus on creating certificates today, but that's where you would select your certificate. If you don't want to use encryption, because you're in the substation, between the Orions, you don't need encryption, you can uncheck this. So this is the main part you need to do on every Cascade server. The NCD file. So let me close this. To create a new NCD file, you click New, pretend my Alex Plus is the cascaded server, sorry, client. Pick whatever Nova card you need. Let's say we are using that 12 port Ethernet Nova card, and make sure you select this cascaded NCD file. Click OK. And I will need to type in, because this is an offline configuration, NCD, I will need to tell the configuration what my IP address of my Alex Plus will be. So let's say it is 202. That TCP port, so whatever I configured on this side, 50,001, I need to make sure it's 50,001 here. Something we added recently in the last firmware, 2 firmware upgrades ago, you now have the ability to send time signal through our Cascade protocol. So when you select this checkbox here and how often you want to send that time, it will send time to your cascaded server devices downstream. And then again, if you are using encryption, this is where you select your certificates. If you're not using encryption, you can uncheck that. You click, so let's say we are doing time syncing, click done. Now under the configure tab, you can see, hey, this is my Orion Alex Plus configuration. You can configure what you need to do here. But to add your server, so this is about adding your IOs underneath. You would go and say add server, what kind of Orion is it? And just to remind you, you can choose other type of Orions, but the most common application we see is Orion IO. Click OK, and then we can just say Orion IO 1, for example. We can do 1.2.01. Make sure that TCP, so this one I configured was actually on 2.08. So to kind of follow that demo purposes, we can say 2.08. This is what my device is hanging off that Cascade architecture. We are talking on 50,001. Click done. In the event at your substation or your application does have a external firewall, make sure port 50,001 is configured for communication. So just to be aware, then now you can see on your IO, it's attached to your Cascade, and now you can configure your IO like a standalone IO. You can go and say hardware IO card, add your card, and so on. So I'm not going to go through this exercise, but just a recap of how to configure a Cascade configuration. One thing to remind everyone, I know that if you use NCD a lot and you might have the habit of opening multiple NCD files, just to remind you, if you have a Cascade file open, which we currently do, you cannot open another NCD file. Just because NCD file has a lot going on, because you can have multiple devices, you just can't open multiple NCD files when you have a cascaded file open. We have 5 minutes left. One additional thing that I would like to show, because I think a lot of customers run into this. It doesn't really apply to the Alex Plus, because Alex Plus has separate cards for RS-232, for RS-485, and so on. But one thing I would like to remind people, if you are using a MX or an LXM, the serial ports on the MX and LXM are RS-232 or RS-485 software selectable. And so by default, those ports are RS-232. And if you need to use RS-485, obviously you're wiring it up and you test it and you're like, why isn't it talking? The main thing that I think people are forgetting is if you go into your settings serial, you need, because the software is selectable, you need to go into the web UI and switch it to RS-485 2-wire or 4-wire. And so let's say you're doing 2-wire, you can also have it that if it's a long RS-485 connection, you might consider enabling the terminating resistor on it. If you require, depending on the device, if that device supports IRIG-B or 5-volt DC signal, you can check this off as well, depending on the device and your wiring. But just a reminder, if you are using 485, or if you switch back, if you were using an MX for 485 and then you're connected to 232 communication connection in that same spot, you need to switch back to 232. So just a reminder, this is where you would go and change that. And for serial connection too, especially when I just touched on for RS-485, this is what I ran into recently, is if you, let's do DNP client, if you are doing multi-drop, we get this a lot too, and you're not getting 485 multi-drop communication to work, I would recommend playing around with the warm-up time and the warm-down time. So when it comes to multi-dropping, and if your communication is too fast, it won't work. RS-485 is old communication, is finicky, and so the warm-up time and the warm-down time does is the time between warm up is that it will send a hey, I'm ready to send signal to the device, and it will wait 10 milliseconds or 20 milliseconds here before it actually starts sending the data, because that means the receiving device is, okay, I got that ready to send, I'm listening now. But if you have this time too low for multi-drop, it won't have time before you send for that device to be ready to receive. So play around with this time. It will probably need to increase as you add more devices on your multi-drop communication. So this is what I ran into recently and wanted to share with everyone. We have 1 minute left, so I believe we covered everything we wanted today. Unfortunately, we didn't get a chance to look into our questions. So Jamie and I will review it offline. Any questions that's easily answered, we'll answer in our post-webinar email. If it's more unique application, we will reach out to you directly. And if something that we feel like we can share with everyone too, we will add it to a future Power Hour. So my apologies that we didn't get time to get to your questions today. If you did ask it and we didn't get a chance to answer you separately, privately behind the scene here. To kind of end our webinar with our usual summary, just so that you're aware, every webinar ends up being posted on our community site. If you don't have a login, please register. It's at novatechautomation.com/community. You just need to register with your email address. We'll approve you, and you will have access to drawings, user manuals, previous webinar videos, training information, and so on. Once you are approved to the Power community, you're also approved to our support site too, and that's where you can download the latest firmware. For example, Jamie just kind of showed his latest firmware today with that new pinging capability. So if anyone wants that, download 10.4 today. You can download it at the customer site. Firmware, your latest NCD software, and so on, you can download it from there. As a reminder, if you need a 30-minute session with any of our sales engineers to go through a unique application, if you want, we're seeing an increase on this usage, so thank you for anyone who's using it. You have ability to select sales engineers, specific ones, or if you say anyone, it will assign someone that's available in that time slot. Oh, thank you everyone for attending today. Feel free to reach out to Jamie and myself if you have any questions, and we will see you next month in our next month Power Hour. Thank you.